The Lakers outmuscle the Thunder. The Bucks storm back without Giannis versus the Clippers. The Bulls pull off a crazy upset. Something that's like the Memphis Grizzlies beat the Nets. Plus, we'll talk about top 5 coaches in the NBA and some news with the Raptors and Cavaliers. All that and more on Locked On NBA.
You are Locked On NBA, your daily NBA podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On NBA, your daily source for all things NBA from the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for joining us and making this part of your day. Appreciate you guys being with us across all platforms, whether you're joining us on Apple Podcasts, where we do appreciate those 5-star reviews, Spotify, or if you're catching us on YouTube at youtube.com/LockedOnNBA. We do have shows for you Monday through Friday. We appreciate you being an everydayer joining us here on the flagship of Locked On NBA. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. My name is Matt Moore. I'm the senior NBA writer for the Action Network and co-host of Locked On Nuggets, joined by David Ramil, co-host of Locked On Heat. Lots to get to on today's show. We'll talk about the Lakers bounce back win versus the Thunder. We'll talk about the Milwaukee Bucks and their comeback versus the Los Angeles Clippers without Giannis Antetokounmpo as Damian Lillard finally looks at home. We'll give our top 5 coaches this season after Eric Spoelstra and Steve Kerr win Coach of the Month honors. We'll talk about the Raptors making some moves, both with extensions and some surgeries. And we'll talk about Donovan Mitchell missing some time with a concerning knee injury situation. But we'll start, David Ramil. Los Angeles Lakers, fresh off a loss to the Denver Nuggets, their 8th straight. They faced the Oklahoma City Thunder, who were themselves on a back-to-back. This is a tough spot, David. I got to tell you, I gave this one out in terms of like a pick for this game. I had the Lakers in this game. This is a perfect spot. At home, you got a young Thunder team off of a big win and a comeback versus the Suns on a road back-to-back, with 208-pound center Chet Holmgren going up against Anthony Davis. And if there's one thing I'm here to tell you, is that Anthony Davis loves it when he's got somebody little he can push around. Anthony Davis tonight with 24 points, 7 of 12 shooting, 12 boards for AD. But D'Angelo Russell was actually the guy that got super hot in the third quarter as the Lakers broke this one open as those back-to-back legs hit for the Thunder. 26 points, 6 boards, 3 assists, 4 steals for D'Angelo Russell, +4, 9 of 17 shooting. LeBron with a pedestrian 19 points, 11 rebounds, 8 assists, ho-hum on 7 of 14 shooting. OKC really struggled in this one offensively, 39% from the field, 39% from 3. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander finally doesn't hit 30 points. He has 20 points on 5 of 13 shooting, just not the Thunder's night. This is a bad matchup for them. And even though it's a back-to-back spot, this is something to keep your eye on as we get closer to the playoffs and the eventuality that the Lakers wind up from the play-in tournament in a matchup in the first round with these Thunder.
It's a good point. It's a perfect storm of things that pose the chances for the Oklahoma City Thunder. Are obviously a bigger team in Los Angeles, a team that's a little bit more, I wouldn't say capable, but experienced, certainly. They understood the assignment a little bit better than Oklahoma City. And I think obviously coming back on a second night of a back-to-back, you were going to have a case of fatigue there. They didn't look engaged. They didn't look like they were. They were able to have a brief lead there. They were, at the same time, it felt tenuous at best, and especially on a night when Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was struggling, but Chet Holmgren was struggling, Jalen Williams was struggling. I think they went a combined 13 of 36 from the floor, those 3 players. That's not going to cut it. And without their 3-point shooting, they just didn't really have any kind of answer for Los Angeles size. And as you pointed out, D'Lo catching fire like that, that's certainly a bonus for the Lakers. Everything worked out. They were well rested. Oklahoma City was not. And so it's just, I don't know if you can look at it as in a macro view and say that this kind of loss exposes the Thunder to a degree. Like, if they were to meet in a 7-game series, what would you think of Oklahoma City's chances against the Lakers?
I think the OKC is a better team, but I do think the rebounding and the size problem is going to be an issue. I mean, look, a part of this too is the Lakers got to the line for 25 free throws versus the Thunder's 16. This is in a time period where after the All-Star break, free throw attempts are down. but the Lakers are able to generate that because of their size and physicality. And we saw this last night with Yusuf Nurkic getting 31 rebounds. Like, the Thunder don't have a center. They don't have a big, and that's on purpose. Like, they designed this team very specifically. They are being patient and letting Chet play 5 and working through that. And maybe this summer they'll pick up a center, but right now they don't have one. And so, like, look, that's a problem in the Western Conference because the Lakers look small versus the Nuggets, but they look huge versus the Thunder. The Suns look outmatched versus a lot of teams, but they look pretty beastly inside versus OKC, despite the loss without Booker on a back-to-back. The Wolves, a big team. The Nuggets, obviously huge. The West is big. And this is a problem, I think, for OKC when we look into the playoffs. But one thing I do want to kind of get your thoughts on as somebody that covers the Heat nightly, because this has been rattling around my brain, David.
Yeah, I know.
So we accept, So we accept that there's kind of a consensus, and I'm part of this, that thinks that the Heat are live to win the Eastern Conference. As dominant as the Celtics have been, we've seen them struggle, and we've seen the Heat do this before, where they're pedestrian in the regular season, and then they make a run. It wasn't just last year. They weren't great the year of the bubble, but they did make a run. They were a higher seed then.
Yes.
But yet, if you ask the average fan, like, who's got a better chance of making the finals between the Thunder and the Heat, I think most people would say the Heat, despite the fact that only 5 teams in the last 30 years have made the finals as lower than a 3 seed. And most of the seeds are the 1s and 2s, which OKC is going to be, because you prove you're a better team throughout. They're also a member of the 40-20 club. They had 40 wins before 20 losses, something Phil Jackson used to talk about. So my question for you is, if the Heat are capable of being an outlier in that their experience and their experience in coaching is such an edge that they're an outlier beyond all these trends, OKC has been so phenomenal this season, tonight accepted, especially coming into the night, they had the best record versus top 10 teams in point differential, better than even the Celtics this season. Right. They don't have it anymore because they lost the Lakers. Now they're number 2 behind Boston. Isn't it possible that the Thunder could be that exception of a young team that we're like, no, there's no way because they're so young, but they just are that good? Because usually young teams aren't this good.
I don't think so. I really don't. And I know that you're going to look at me and say, you know what, he covers the Heat. There's some
I think you're probably right.
Homerism to it. But at the same time, I think the experience factor is a big component of what makes the Heat such a capable opponent and why you can hold that against the Oklahoma City Thunder, because they don't have that experience, because their best players lack it, because their coach lacks it. And I think that matters. I think it's again another perfect storm for Miami in that you have their best player who generally takes the regular season off. And he's admitted as much in a recent interview with Chris Haynes of Bleacher Report. He talked about the fact that he gets better, even though he's long denied to local media, or myself included. He says, no, there is no playoff Jimmy. And then at the same time, he goes and says, I don't know. I just turned into the best player in the world. What can I do? I don't know how it happens. I just do it. Between Eric Spoelstra, between the understanding that home court advantage doesn't really phase Miami, or the lack of home court advantage doesn't really phase them. They go into any matchup with the knowledge that they can beat any opponent. And they have. They beat the Bucks. They beat the Celtics. They beat the Sixers. They beat every team in the East at one point or another in this playoff race over the last 4 seasons of Jimmy's stint there in Miami. And so I think they can afford to take the regular season off to a certain degree, knowing that they're building habits towards the postseason where those games actually matter. The record doesn't matter. So I don't know that you can use that as a standard or a template for other teams to follow, but I know you can hold it against Oklahoma City at the same time, because they don't have it. They can't turn it on. They can't flip the switch the same way Jimmy and the Miami Heat have shown that they're capable of doing over the last 4 seasons. And so I think when you look at what the Thunder have done during the regular season, they're building things in the right way, but they just need to get a little bit more experience, a little bit more confidence in knowing, okay, we have another level we can reach, because regular season basketball and playoff basketball is very, very different. Miami understands that better than any team in the NBA, I think. And I think that's why they've had the success that they've had. And until Oklahoma City understands it, what they accomplish in the regular season doesn't really matter much, because, and I'll use this argument for Boston or other teams too. Like they've got an incredible historic record. They had an incredible historic record last year too. Their offense was great, etc. Their defense was fantastic. All the platitudes. And what happened? They still met Miami, and it didn't really matter. So again, I think Miami is just, they've got all these different factors that work in their favor, but you can't use that as a standard for any other team because they don't have a player like Jimmy Butler. They don't have a coach like Eric Spoelstra, and I think those things matter.
I'm more interested in the idea that history says that teams that look like the Heat don't win, and history says teams that look like the Thunder do win, and we have the opposite opinion of both. And that can be true, but I think it's a really interesting question. You mentioned that big edge that the Heat have with Eric Spoelstra and what he brings to the table. Coaching, I think, is the biggest factor in the Eastern Conference, and that's why I think tonight's result in Milwaukee is really interesting, as well as the results of the Coach of the Month award in February. We'll talk about Doc Rivers. We'll talk about Eric Spoelstra. We'll talk about Joe Mazzulla on the other side when we return on Locked On NBA. Today's episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. You know, sometimes we all need the opportunity to get something off of our chest. Big or small, certain things can really start to get to you. It's important to let that out, especially to someone who's unbiased on your life. So today I want to say how I really feel about something. You might even be thinking the same thing this week. So for me, it's this. I get so stressed out that I go in spirals, and that negative behavior is not something that helps me, and it's best represented by Twitter. Like, I get text messages from people that are like, "Are you okay?" That's a warning sign I should log off, right? I've got 2 kids. I've got a very busy like professional life. I got a lot going on. And yet I find myself in these periods where I get really torn up over Twitter comments from random strangers. And the answer there is not that I'm actually upset about those comments. It's that I'm upset about other things in my life. My daughter was fussy this morning. She was just cranky as all get out, and it put me in a mood. And I wound up battling people on Twitter when I could have been doing other things with my time. Trying to recognize those behaviors and get out of them is part of why therapy is so important. Therapy can be different for everyone. Most of us have bigger problems than your favorite sports team. It's important to get things off your chest every once in a while. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. We'll be right back on Locked On NBA. Back here on Locked On NBA. Thanks for joining us. Matt Moore alongside David Ramil. I love how Lake and Ball says, I love how we just forget the Heat were the 1 seed in 22 and got bounced at home by the Celtics. So we got some, I think we got some Celtics fans hearing this. This should be enjoyable. Okay. Speaking of coaches, Anna and Mark says, Dagnall, coach of the year, Matt. Stevens will get the credit for the assembly of talent. Maz, a little defiant and still remnants of last season too, which brings us to the Eastern Conference coaches, which this is a fascinating topic for me because it's a lot of how I look at the Eastern Conference playoff race this year. But first, among those coaches, we got to talk about result tonight because Doc Rivers got maybe one of the best wins of his short tenure with the Milwaukee Bucks. The Bucks without Giannis at home are facing the Clippers, who were on a back-to-back, but the Bucks trailed by double digits in this game and then stormed back in the fourth quarter behind lockdown defense. They managed to corral Kawhi Leonard. They kept Paul George quiet. They beat up on the bench, which has been a big issue for Milwaukee. This was a huge night for Bobby Portis with 28 points, and the Bucks get the win versus the Los Angeles Clippers in a comeback effort. They allowed just 106 points to the Clippers tonight, David, and I will say it's just remarkable the difference that going from Adrian Griffin to Doc Rivers has had. This isn't like Doc has installed some marvelous scheme. Like Doc would tell you, like, he's not doing much different. It's more of there was nonsense and nonsensical schemes getting in the way of what Milwaukee is capable of doing as a veteran team that knows how to play. And they've gotten rid of all that under Doc, and they know what they're doing. And that's been the biggest thing, is that Doc is a stabilizer, and it's less that the Bucks are better now and more that the Bucks have stabilized in a team that with competent coaching, they would have always been.
Yeah, I'll go as far to say that I think they do look better. I mean, they had a pretty good record beforehand. To your point, I think I agree with that. But at the same time, like, I saw something recently saying that, it's something that seems like it would just be obvious, like installing plays designed for Damian Lillard, similar to what he ran in Portland. Like, they weren't doing that in Milwaukee. Adrian Griffin was not doing that. And it was a matter of getting Damian to the point where he was more comfortable. And we saw that tonight. We've seen that over the past handful of games. They've won, 6 in a row now since the All-Star break.
Yeah.
They look like a much better team. They're playing defense at a higher level. I think there's an accountability and understanding of a role there now that I think was lacking. I don't know that you could have made the argument a month ago that they would have been able to win without Giannis, especially against a good Clippers team, even after they were coming off the second game of a back-to-back. So I think that he's definitely made things much better there. But I still have questions about what Doc can do in the playoffs, and I think those are legitimate because Doc has shown that he can be exposed to a certain degree in the playoffs, and I wonder how he's able to take this roster and compensate for whatever weaknesses he's shown in the past.
I want to get into a conversation about the coaching stuff a little bit more, but I do want to note this real quick. Ivica Zubac was a +3. They won his minutes. It was a quiet night. I didn't think Zoo played well, but they won his minutes. Daniel Tice was a +4. Mason Plumlee didn't play. The Clippers lost this game. So look at this. You got +3, +4 with the two centers on the court. That's a +7, and they lost by 7 points. They were a -14 in the small ball lineups. Ty Lue, for the love of God, give it up. It's not 2019 anymore, my man. It's certainly not 2016. It is no longer time of just, if we just go small, we're going to win. I understand that's how you won a title. You got to get away from this, man. This is like that time is over. You got to stay big. Giving up size of the Bucks like they did, I thought was a huge reason why their offense stalled out in this game. Let's talk about the coaches a little bit more. Because I think it's a really interesting thing. I think getting a sense of the top 5, I think, is really interesting. One of the reasons I'm still skeptical on the Bucks, David, is this. I think Doc is great as a regular season coach because of what we've seen in the stretch. He stabilizes things. He gets guys he's just a professional. The guys feel like they can trust him. He's a good coach. He's not a problem solver. And that to me is like a huge issue because the playoffs have become so much about that with, can you solve this one tactical issue or can you create this one tactical problem for the opponent? And Doc's not really good at that. He just keeps doubling down on the strategies that have gotten him there. And a lot of coaches are like that.
Yep.
So that's like a huge problem for me versus this is one of the things I think is fascinating in the Eastern Conference. If we look at problem solvers, look, Eric Spoelstra is number 1. I don't think anybody in the league is going to dispute that Eric Spoelstra is number 1. In the Eastern Conference, I'm going with Nick Nurse number 2. I think he is the second best problem solver and overall tactical mind for winning a playoff series in the Eastern Conference.
Yep.
I don't know who I go to after that in the East. I really don't. It's a lot of guys that I don't trust. I'll give you my top 5 coaches in the league overall because I thought this would be a good kind of exercise for us to look at this. I think Spoelstra's 1. I think Michael Malone deserves to be 2. I'm co-host of Locked On Nuggets. I get it. I'm not a Nuggets fan, but look, the man has developed talent, built a contender, built a team that is extremely difficult to beat, and built a top 10 defense with Nikola Jokic at center. At some point, probably need to accept that the guy's pretty good at his job. 3's tough. I think I might actually. I think Mark Daigneault's so good. I think he is so good. I will probably go with Nick Nurse, but it's you only got Nick Nurse for a very small amount of time. 4. I'll go with Mark Daigneault, and then at 5th, I'm going to go with 4th, I'm going to go with Steve Kerr because I still believe in championships, and Steve Kerr still deserves credit. And 5th, I'll go with Mark Daigneault, maybe tied with Chris Finch. What's your top 5 list of coaches right now?
It's almost identical. I don't have Kerr in my list just because I think, the last few seasons when they were injury marred and they were kind of retooling, let's say, I think that kind of showed that maybe he didn't have a good grip. And I think even this season, not playing guys like Kuminga and Moody early enough and not entrusting them so that they could be more valuable replacement players or just components of your system. I think that's a big thing. So my number 1, I guess I have Spo. I've got Nurse 2nd and I've got Malone 3rd. And I agree with you 100%. I love Malone. I think he's given them an ethos, and we've kind of forgotten he had success in Sacramento, something that a lot of coaches were not able to achieve. And he was wrongfully terminated there when they wanted to make a change. I've got Chris Finch 4th, and I've got Daigneault 5th. I love what he's building there. To hear him talk about their approach and the building of a culture and everything else like that. And maybe it's just kind of peppered because I have heard him speak when he's specifically in Miami and kind of in contrast with what the Thunder have and what he'd like to achieve, something similar to what Eric Spoelstra has in Miami. But he just talks about it in such a similar way, understanding there's a culture and accountability, all the different things that we were accustomed to hearing from Miami. They're trying to establish that. He's trying to establish that in Oklahoma City. So I've got him as my 5th coach. I've got Tyronn Lue, Tibbs, they're all good coaches, right? But they all have obvious weaknesses as well. And I think you can make a case for Joe Mazzulla as well. He's shown that he can coach them during the regular season, but I think, there's still a lack of experience there. And I wonder whether or not he might get exposed himself this playoff.
Who would you rather have in a playoff series, Joe Mazzulla or Doc Rivers? We just saw this and Mazzulla won, but I'm asking, who would you rather have from a coaching standpoint, Joe Mazzulla or Doc Rivers?
I think I'd prefer Mazzulla.
Mazzulla.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't.
Doc has a championship too. That's what's crazy. Doc has a title.
He does. But you can only take Ubuntu so far, right? I mean, it's not 2008 anymore. Sure. And look, I like Doc. I like talking to him. I like everything he has to say, what he's dealing with. He's so great with media. It's fantastic to always hear him talking and everything else like that, even as he's throwing his players under the bus. But at the same time, I think we've seen the book on him that there can be a lack of flexibility there. And that's what it takes, especially in the postseason. You have to be able to recognize these changes and understand what's at stake here and make the adjustments necessary. I don't think anybody does it better than Eric Spoelstra. And I think that's why he's been able to take these rosters that have these two-way players and everything else. Maybe you can credit everything that Spo does to the fact that they have this culture. They have this kind of whole system in place throughout the whole franchise. But I think it matters that he can make these small adjustments, and it's proven to be successful.
On the other side, we'll wrap up with some more of the scores from tonight's games. We'll get to some news with the Toronto Raptors, who had a busy day, surprisingly, at a kind of quiet time of the season. Plus, the Cavs get some unfortunate news with Donovan Mitchell. All that and more on as we wrap up here on Locked On NBA. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. We'll be right back on Locked On NBA. Final segment here on Locked On NBA, wrapping up some more of the news from Monday night with you. Matt Moore alongside David Ramil. Bulls stormed back versus the Kings. This is a wild game. Kings broke this open, and we're up to like a 19-point lead. And I was watching it, and I was like, oh, no. I was like, the Bulls are coming back. The Bulls are coming. Like, you could just feel it. David, my big thing from this, I think Chicago is not as bad of a team as their record shows. They're not a much better team than their record shows, but they're not quite as bad as their record shows. I just have a really hard time believing in the Kings. This is last year was so much fun to see them finally make the playoffs, get those playoff wins, almost knock off the Warriors. Magic hasn't been the same this year. I think this team really does need something to change it up. There's games where I'm like, yeah, they're really tough. And there's just like a lot of games where I was like, there's something missing from considering this team to be like a real dark horse threat in the Western Conference.
No, I agree 100%. Their ability to blow leads so frequently. Mm-hmm. I think it just, I don't know. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's the players. I don't know if it's the coaches or a combination of those. I mean, I think it's more obvious that you could probably tweak the roster to some degree, as much talent as they have in Sabonis and Fox and everybody else. I just think that they're missing something. I'm not sure exactly what that player could be, but it's somebody that would at least fortify their defense to a certain degree where they wouldn't be giving up these huge leads.
This is a random game that most people probably did not watch. Grizzlies Nets was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun, despite like me being like, wow, there's just guys on this I didn't know existed a month ago. Trey Jameson started for the Grizzlies at center. Please get some centers this summer, Grizzlies. Luke Kennard had 25 points. Jake LaRavia had 14. As the Grizzlies get the win over the Nets with Mikal Bridges and Nick Claxton, and Dennis Schroeder and Dorian Finney-Smith and Cam Johnson in this game. Matt Hurt hit a three-pointer, looked really good on the one that he hit like that. Lamar Stevens gave them 13 points on 6 of 12 shooting and looked awesome. Like, shout out Lamar Stevens for this game. David, my big takeaway from this one, though, Mikal Bridges had 14 points on 14 shots, and they lost on the front end of a back-to-back to basically the Memphis Hustle. If Mikal Bridges wants to get paid, like the guy, if he wants to be one of the guys in this league, I understand that he's like, I didn't ask to be traded here. I didn't ask to wind up on this mismatched roster of guys. I understand that he wasn't happy with Jacques Vaughn, but you got the coach out. Like Kevin Ollie took over. I need to see more leadership from Mikal Bridges here because like just going for like 14 points on 14 shots versus the hustle. I know the season's done. I get it, but like you got to set the tone, man. It starts with you. They need more from Mikal Bridges.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. He's just not ready. I don't think he was. He didn't have that role previously. I don't think he's ever held that role. And I think he's kind of looked to carry the team and inspire them to, degrees that they have not been able to reach this season. I don't think there's been any team more disappointing this year than the Brooklyn Nets. And as a player, as an individual, I think he's been a huge disappointment as well. I think he probably admit as much, as tough as that might be for him to swallow. Like, I think there's talent there. I think there's ability, but there's just something missing in terms of his ability to carry that team and inspire them to accomplish something and to play beyond their means. And he's just not that guy right now. I don't think he ever will be, to be honest with you. If you're not capable of doing it at this point, you rarely show up as a leader later down in your career. Like, that's just not something you develop. You've seen young players kind of establish themselves as leaders early on, and they just maintain that throughout the rest of the season. Chris Paul, etc. I mean, there's been others, and maybe that's historic greatness in terms of leadership, but Bridges just seems to be missing that spark, whatever it is that is capable of leading men into action the way that some people can do. I just don't think he's capable.
Some other news in the NBA today as we wrap up here. Scotty Barnes underwent surgery on the third metacarpal bone in his left hand on Monday, the team announced in a release. No timetable was provided, but TSN's Josh Lewenberg reports that he will miss. The expectation is he'll miss the rest of the regular season. Meanwhile, the Raptors gave a 2-year extension to Kelly Olynyk, who they acquired in trade. I kind of wondered, like, why at first. I was like, kind of why. It's a $26.25 million extension, first reported by Adrian Wojnarowski of ESPN. The Raptors fans were like, look, it's tradable, it's short, he likes being here, he's from Canada, it's a good position. They traded a first to get him. I think that's kind of, once I looked at it through that lens, I was like, all right, you kind of have to extend him. You can't trade and then not keep him.
Right.
And it is tradable, and everybody does want centers. And Olynyk was like, he did have a lot of offers, which is why it was weird the Raptors got him. It's just like, I just continue to kind of be like, why are they're not treading water, because they obviously traded off all these guys, but they're like half treading water. Yeah. I get it from you trade assets for him, he fits, and he's a good player. But I feel like from Raptors fans, I'm like, you guys still think that you're like good, and you're not bad. You're not terrible. You're not the Wizards. But like, you're not a 500 team. And I just don't know what's the point of sinking this kind of money in a 2-year for a veteran. You can get a return on him later, but it's just a little bit weird to me, the entire thing of sinking assets into an aging veteran center.
Yeah, it's been 6 years now, maybe longer, 8 years since he signed with Miami. That he's had the quote unquote tradable contract. It's a fine deal. It's not like an extreme overpay, but you kind of scratch your head and go, oh, is he really worth that much? And I like Kelly. I know what he can bring to the table. At the same time, I agree 100%. I just don't understand this kind of conflicting timeline there. Like, he's not the piece that you need to be focused on at this point in the losing season, when you're clearly, kind of basically, the rest of the season is a wash here without Scotty Barnes. So I don't know why you bother going through that. Again, as you pointed out, you made a trade for him on the first place. You have to do something to kind of shore up that roster spot. But I don't think there was any clamoring for any player or for Kelly to become as a free agent or anything like that. He's not going to be highly coveted. So I don't know. It's weird, because you're making these moves that feel like they're kind of unnecessary overall. But you know what? Maybe it's for good vibes, and maybe you can trade Kelly at some point. He's not going to play out these 2 seasons of his extension in Toronto. I can tell you that much.
Yeah, probably not. Michael Grange, an absolute legend, by the way, of Sportsnet, did report, by the way, that one important note here is Olynyk won't have to worry about his contract and can instead commit to Team Canada this summer for the Olympics. That actually does make quite a bit of sense. No, I'm serious.
He was going to do that anyway, though, right? I mean, like, he was going to do that anyway. Like, he was going to get his money.
A lot of guys worry about committing to, like, if they've got free agency. I've seen a lot of guys skip the Olympics if they got free agency. Right. They don't want to risk it. So it's good for him to be able to go, because Team Canada needs to make a run this year. Fair enough. Donovan Mitchell, wrapping up. Donovan Mitchell's going to miss 3 games. He had PRP. He had platelet-rich plasma injection from the Cavaliers announced it's a bone bruise He received a platelet-rich plasma injection on Monday to treat a left knee bone bruise that caused him to miss Cleveland's past 2 games against Detroit and New York. He'll be out the next 3 games. Doesn't seem like it's like a long-term thing. Most notably, that because it's focused on addressing a specific acute injury in the bruise, it's not considered to be like as scary maybe as if it's like, hey, he's having like problems in the ligaments and those kind of things and the various issues that players have had. This has become pretty common. So maybe it's not a big deal, but it is kind of a big deal when you get the Bucks surging and the Cavs are trying to hold on to the 2 seed, or they've lost it now. They're trying to get the 2 seed back in order to take home court potentially in a second round if they can finally win a playoff series.
Yeah, it is a concern. Are they just playing it cautiously? Like, could he have continued to play through this injury? I wonder. And I think there are even bigger questions about the Cavs too. Like, do you feel as high on them? And kind of wrapping up this whole conversation, given their coaching, given their general lack of experience in the roster and everything else, I think it's a great team. I think they've really shown out this season. Are you high on the Cavs as they enter the playoffs?
I want to be, but I'm really scarred from that playoff series last year. I got to really stress this. Tom Thibodeau is the worst playoff coach currently coaching as a dog in the playoffs in terms of his record. Like, when he's not expected to win, he never wins. And he dominated JB Bickerstaff and the Cavaliers last year. Now the roster's better. Maybe that helps. And this is the thing with JB is I'm like, he's coached them to back-to-back top 2 defensive seasons. The Cavs are the second best defense in the NBA.
Yeah,
like, they're really good. And he did that with Evan Mobley missing several months. And they've gotten this record with Garland missing several months. Like, I want to praise JB Bickerstaff and be like, who's underrated? But boy, that series sticks out to me. He made so many tactical errors in that series. He's going to have to redeem himself in these playoffs before I'm able to get back on JB Bickerstaff Island.
Fair enough. I think you could make the same case for Jared Allen as well.
Yeah, that's true. All right, it's going to do it for Locked On NBA. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate you guys being with us here on a Tuesday. Make sure to stick around tomorrow where Jake Madison and John Corrales will have you covered. On Thursday, Pat the Designer and Nick Angstadt will break down all the night's games. And on Friday, you've got Wes Goldberg and Adam Mares, 2 guys that we know and I guess fairly tolerate. Okay. You can catch those guys on Friday. We appreciate you being an everydayer. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you guys again next time here on Locked On NBA.